heaven sends a warrior, hell starts a meeting. That's not poetry, that's protocol. Because the moment a chosen one steps into the world, the atmosphere shifts. Suddenly, people who once adored you start glitching like broken software. They can't explain it, but your presence scrambles their comfort zones. You didn't offend them, your existence did. Here's the funny part. They actually thought they were the main characters until you showed up. You were just minding your business, sipping divine tea and walking in purpose, and somehow that became a spiritual crime. Their group chats turned into confession booths. Their gossip became prophecy without them knowing it. But let's get factual for a second. Even science says strong electromagnetic fields interfere with weak signals. So imagine what happens when a human angel walks into a room carrying frequencies straight from the throne of God. That's not energy, that's spiritual Wi-Fi, and not everyone's device is compatible. Now they want to apologize. Not because they've changed, but because the truth finally caught up to them. The one they plotted against wasn't fragile. They were wrestling one of God's strongest angels in human form. This isn't karma, it's calibration. The universe is just reminding everyone what happens when you mistake divine restraint for defeat. They want to apologize. They're against one of God's strongest angels in human form. This one's about to get celestial, convicting, and just a little bit funny in that God really set this up perfectly kind of way. They mocked what they couldn't measure. That's where it all began. People often fear what they can't define, and you were never something they could easily categorize. You carried an energy that didn't fit into their limited understanding of what strength should look like. You weren't loud, yet your silence carried weight. You weren't aggressive, but your presence commanded attention. They thought power had to roar, but yours whispered and still shook the ground. That's why they mocked you. It was their defense mechanism against something that made them feel small. They tried to size you up by the same worldly measurements they use on everyone else. Status, popularity, material gain. What they didn't realize was that your value was measured in obedience, not applause. Your worth wasn't built in visibility. It was rooted in alignment. They saw you as too quiet, too calm, too forgiving. They didn't know that God hides his strongest warriors behind humility. The world expects divine strength to arrive wearing crowns and armor, but heaven often disguises it in patience, empathy, and peace. That's how they missed you, because your glory didn't look like noise. They laughed when you didn't retaliate. They rolled their eyes when you stayed kind. They mistook your grace for ignorance. But what they failed to see was that your restraint was strategic. Every time you held your tongue, heaven was taking notes. Every time you walked away, you were building spiritual credit. They thought you were doing nothing, when in truth, you were mastering divine timing. When they mocked you, it wasn't really about you. It was about what you triggered in them. Your light exposed their shadows. Your authenticity made their pretenses uncomfortable. People who live off control can't stand someone who stays powerful without manipulation. So they tried to shrink you, because you were weak, but because you reminded them they were unhealed. Now the same people who mocked are realizing they miscalculated. They see that what they couldn't measure was exactly what made you unstoppable. You didn't need validation. You carried revelation. You weren't trying to be seen. You were sent. And that's the part they could never measure, because divine assignments don't fit into human formulas. You were heaven's rebellion in human form. Your life itself was a statement that light still wins, even when surrounded by darkness. From the beginning, your journey didn't follow the normal script. You were wired differently, built to challenge systems that people had learned to accept as normal. You weren't here to blend in, you were here to interrupt. And every time you walked into a room, something in the atmosphere shifted. Not because you tried to be special, but because you carried something that couldn't coexist with deception, control, or fear. That's why opposition found you so early. The enemy never wastes effort on the average. You carried a kind of spiritual defiance that didn't need rebellion through words. Your existence was rebellion enough. Every time you refused to conform to chaos, every time you stayed soft in a hard world, you were pushing back against hell's agenda. People didn't understand that your resistance wasn't about ego or stubbornness. It was divine programming. God designed you to be unbending in truth, unshaken by noise, and unwilling to sell your peace for acceptance. You became a walking contradiction to their logic. They thought strength looked like domination, but you showed them it could look like grace. They thought survival meant fitting in, but you survived by staying authentic. You broke every rule they tried to use to define power. That's why your presence disturbed the proud and inspired the broken, because you were proof that light could live among wolves and not lose its purity. The battles you faced weren't random. Every setback, every betrayal, every misunderstanding was warfare disguised as experience. You weren't being punished. You were being trained. Heaven was toughening your spirit, because the assignment on your life required resilience that couldn't be taught, only forged. Every tear was armor. Every disappointment was refinement. And every storm that came against you was secretly strengthening your wings. You are heaven's rebellion, not through destruction, but through endurance. You are living proof that darkness doesn't win by fighting harder. It loses when the light refuses to quit. Your survival isn't just personal victory. It's divine evidence that even when the world plots against God's plan, heaven always has the final move. Their attacks were proof of spiritual recognition. What most people call hate or jealousy is often just spiritual acknowledgement in disguise. They saw something in you that their words couldn't describe, but their spirits could feel. That's why they reacted before they even understood why. You didn't do anything to provoke them. Your light did. People connected to darkness recognize divine energy before anyone else, and their first instinct is to attack it. It's not personal, it's positional. They sensed what you carried long before it became visible. They could feel the authority on your life even when you were still figuring it out yourself. That's why the resistance came early. Some of the people who turned on you weren't driven by logic. They were driven by spiritual discomfort. Something in you reminded them of what they lost, or never had. You carried peace that made their chaos nervous. You walked with grace that exposed their insecurities. Without saying a word, you revealed the imbalance in their spirit, and that made them treat you like an enemy. But here's the deeper truth. Opposition is the universe's way of identifying the chosen. The moment God marks you, life starts revealing who's aligned with you and who's not. Every betrayal, every smear, every silent battle was actually a form of spiritual recognition. The enemy was confirming your identity. The warfare around you was never random. It was evidence that something powerful was awakening inside you. They couldn't handle the weight of your calling because they weren't built to carry that frequency. So, they did the only thing they knew. They tried to distort it, dismiss it, or destroy it. But the more they talked, the more your purpose solidified. What they meant for harm became your confirmation. You didn't need validation from them. Their resistance was your validation. You were recognized before you were celebrated. The spiritual realm knew your name long before the world did. And that's why you became a target. They thought they were stopping you, but they were actually revealing you. Every attack you endured was proof that heaven had already introduced you to hell as a threat. And once you're recognized in the spirit, no human rejection can erase that divine appointment. They didn't betray you. They revealed themselves. Betrayal always feels personal at first, but when you look deeper, it's really divine exposure. It's not about what they did to you. It's about what God needed you to see. Their disloyalty was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to deliver you. Every person who walked away or turned against you was actually being repositioned by a higher hand. You didn't lose anyone essential. You lost those who couldn't breathe at your altitude. God used their actions like an X-ray, showing you what eyes alone couldn't. You would have never believed some of them were envious, manipulative, or secretly rooting for your downfall until he let the mask slip. You prayed for clarity, and exposure became the answer. It didn't feel like protection in the moment. It felt like heartbreak. But the truth is, he had to break your illusion before it broke your purpose. Some people were never supposed to stand near your anointing because their loyalty had conditions. They loved you as long as you stayed small, but your growth offended the parts of them still living in fear. What you called betrayal was simply revelation. God didn't let them change, he let them show. Their words, their silence, their sudden distance. It was all spiritual proof that not everyone assigned to your path was meant to reach your promise. You see, exposure is heaven's way of clearing your environment before elevation. He couldn't let you carry counterfeit energy into the next chapter. He couldn't let you keep trusting hearts that would eventually contaminate the mission. You were never the victim. You were the vessel. They didn't break you. They identified themselves. The moment you stopped chasing explanations and started embracing revelation, peace took over. You began to understand that losing people wasn't punishment. It was purification. Every person who betrayed you made space for someone genuine. Every disconnection was a blessing wrapped in confusion. Now, you don't resent their absence. You thank God for the early warning. Because what looked like rejection was really redirection. Their betrayal didn't end your story. It secured it. You didn't lose anything real. You simply gained truth, and truth never betrays. Their apologies aren't about remorse. They're about realization. Time and truth have a way of exposing the difference between guilt and awareness. Most of the people who turned against you aren't suddenly sorry for what they did. They're just shocked by who you became despite it. They expected your downfall to validate their choices, but instead, your resilience made them question their judgment. They don't actually miss you. They miss what came with you. The energy, the peace, the covering, the favor. You were a walking blessing they mishandled, and now they're realizing what proximity to you really meant. When they had you, they were casual with your value. They thought your kindness was weakness, your giving was naivety, your patience was blind loyalty. Now they're realizing that you weren't naive, you were nurturing, you weren't weak. You were wise enough to know when silence could teach louder than confrontation. And that realization stings, because it's one thing to lose a person, but it's another to realize you lost divine favor that came through them. That's the kind of awareness that makes people apologize. Not because they've changed, but because they finally see what their blindness cost them. The same mouth that disrespected your name now speaks it with caution. The same eyes that rolled at your presence now watch your growth with regret. They thought you were ordinary because they couldn't comprehend extraordinary energy in a humble vessel. They confused accessibility with simplicity. You gave them something sacred and they treated it like common. But when God elevated you, He didn't just vindicate you, He educated them. He turned your pain into a living lesson about misjudging divine vessels. So when the apologies come, and they will, you'll notice the tone isn't repentance, it's realization. They're not saying, I'm sorry for hurting you. They're saying, I finally see who you were. But by the time they see it, access has already expired. You've grown into a place where closure isn't needed and validation isn't relevant. Their apologies are echoes of recognition too late to matter. Because when God reveals your true worth, even those who betrayed you are forced to confess, not with sincerity but with awe. You were sent to be misunderstood first. It was never punishment, it was preparation. Every chosen one goes through a season where nothing and no one seems to understand them. It's not because you're broken or confusing. It's because you're operating from a frequency that most people haven't tuned into yet. You were never meant to fit their patterns. You were meant to disrupt them. The misjudgment you faced wasn't random. It was divine camouflage. God hid your purpose behind misunderstanding, so that only the spiritually discerning could recognize what you carried. They called you strange, too deep, too intense, too much. But that was because they were looking at divine design through human logic. They saw your difference as a flaw when it was actually your fingerprint. God doesn't build chosen ones for comfort. He builds them for confrontation with darkness. That means your spirit will always stand out, and people who haven't met themselves yet will project their confusion onto you. They couldn't label you accurately because your purpose didn't fit their vocabulary. You had to walk through isolation because revelation can't be birthed in crowds. The misunderstanding was your shield. If they had understood you too soon, they would have tried to shape, limit, or misuse what God was still developing in private. You were hidden in plain sight, misinterpreted by those who were never meant to interpret you. They couldn't grasp why your energy felt heavy and holy at the same time, why your life didn't follow linear patterns, why you seemed to attract both favor and warfare simultaneously. But that's how heaven trains its soldiers, through mystery, not clarity. Before heaven crowns you, earth crucifies you. That's the pattern. They had to doubt you before they could see you. Because once God exposes who you truly are, there's no denying it. The same mouths that called you delusional will later call you divine. The same people who laughed at your faith will study your endurance. You were misunderstood first because you were meant to be recognized later. Every whisper, every judgment, every misread moment was part of your unveiling. They never really misunderstood you. They just met you before your time. And when your time finally arrived, so did their revelation. They tried to dim you, not knowing you were fireproof. Every chosen one eventually meets people who mistake destruction for dominance. They thought if they ignored you, discredited you, or disrespected you enough times, your light would fade. They didn't understand that what burns others refines you. You were never powered by their validation. Your strength came from a source they can't access. Every time they tried to turn down your brightness, God turned up your resilience. What they meant to weaken you only awakened something eternal inside you. They threw words like stones, hoping you'd break under the weight of their opinions. But chosen ones don't burn out, they burn through. You were built with spiritual, flame-retardant faith. The more they attacked, the more your purpose expanded. Every disappointment became oxygen for your destiny. They thought the pressure would suffocate you, but it actually intensified your glow. Because divine fire doesn't destroy its carrier, it forges them. That's why you've walked through things that should have ended you and still came out shining. What they didn't realize was that your light was never up for negotiation. It wasn't dependent on who applauded or who left. You don't rise despite the fire, you rise because of it. The heat exposed your durability. The trials made you unshakable. You became proof that divine power doesn't retreat when it's tested. It multiplies. They kept waiting for you to collapse, not knowing the fire they sent was training you for flames 10 times greater. You learned to stop fighting the fire and started partnering with it. You stopped asking, why me? And started saying, try me. Because at some point, you realized the attacks weren't happening to you.